The lake had always been my sanctuary. Tucked away in the rolling hills and framed by towering pines, my small wooden cabin stood at the edge of still waters that reflected the sky like a mirror. To me, this place wasn't just a weekend retreat. It was a piece of history. My family had owned this land for decades, long before the nearby developments, the paved roads, and the invasion of homeowners associations that came with the rise of suburban neighborhoods. For years, I kept mostly to myself. I came here to fish in the mornings, to watch the sun bleed gold across the water, and to let the silence wash over me like medicine. But with time, the area around the lake began to change. Developers carved up the woods, building rows of identical houses with carefully trimmed lawns and street lamps that drown out the stars. Along with those changes came rules, regulations, and committees, people who believed the lake should belong to them, and who weren't shy about trying to enforce their control. That's when Karen appeared. She wasn't hard to spot. Her bright red suit, clipboard, and perpetually pursed lips made her look like she had been born to run meetings no one wanted to attend. Karen quickly became the self-appointed guardian of a newly formed HOA, acting as if every grain of sand on the lake's shore had to pass through her approval. She strutted around like the sheriff of a town she didn't own, enforcing rules that seemed to shift depending on her mood. At first, I ignored her. When she stormed down to the shoreline and demanded to know why my boat wasn't registered with the HOA, I simply nodded and went back to fixing my fishing line. When she claimed my dock was too rustic and out of compliance with HOA aesthetics, I chuckled quietly and sat on it anyway, coffee in hand. But Karen thrived on conflict. The more I dismissed her demands, the more determined she became to force me out. Things escalated on a bright Saturday morning. I was sitting in my lounge chair by the cabin, enjoying a cold drink, when Karen appeared at the edge of property, her heels clicking against a stone path like warning shots. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She barked about trespassing, about how non-residents had no right to use the lake, and how the HOA had voted to restrict access. I could see the confusion in her eyes when I told her calmly that I wasn't going anywhere. To her, I was just another outsider, some squatter trying to use her lake. But she didn't know the truth. The cabin, the land, the water, it was all mine. Not just a sliver, not just a dock, but miles of shoreline and acres of forest stretching further than she could imagine. My family's ownership wasn't just a claim. It was on record, ironclad, sealed decades before the HOA ever existed. Karen, of course, refused to believe me. She pulled out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen like weapons. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens broke the morning calm. She had called 911, reporting a trespasser, insisting I was breaking the law. As a patrol car crunched up the gravel road and 2 officers stepped out, Karen's smug grin widened. She folded her arms like a queen who had already won the battle, convinced the law was on her side. To her, this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would finally get rid of me, once and for all. But what Karen didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was about to see me hauled off my property. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't just picking a fight with a man in a lakeside cabin. She was picking a fight with the owner of the entire county. And soon enough, she and everyone else would know it. The air was heavy with tension as the 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser. Their radios crackled, their boots pressed firmly against the gravel, and their eyes scanned the scene. Me in my chair by the cabin, Karen standing like a general ready to issue orders. She pointed dramatically toward me, as if presenting the villain of a play. "There he is," she announced with triumph in her tone. "That man is trespassing on HOA property. He's been warned multiple times. Arrest him and remove him from the premises immediately." The officers looked at me with caution, one hand resting on his belt, the other jotting notes on a pad. They didn't approach aggressively, but their presence carried weight. Karen, meanwhile, smirked, her red suit practically glowing in the morning sun. To her, this was already over. She had called, they had arrived, and in her mind, justice was about to be served. I didn't move from my chair. I sipped my drink slowly, letting the silence build before I calmly set it down. Then I reached into a folder on the small table beside me, pulling out a stack of documents I had kept ready for a day just like this. Deeds, maps, and legal descriptions dating back nearly 70 years, sealed and notarized, each page proving exactly what Karen refused to believe. The officers exchanged a glance. They were used to HOA disputes, usually petty squabbles over fences, trash cans, or barking dogs. But this felt different. They leaned in, studying the paperwork carefully as I explained, in measured tones, how my family had purchased this land long before the subdivisions, how every acre surrounding this lake had been passed down legally through generations. Karen, however, exploded with rage. She interrupted, waving her arms and shrieking that my papers were fake, that I was lying, that the HOA had voted me out. She pointed again and again toward the water, insisting that the lake belonged to the community. But the officers didn't share her enthusiasm. They kept their composure, their eyes narrowing as they reviewed the records. That's when I revealed the detail that stopped everyone in their tracks. Not only did I own the cabin in the shoreline, it turned out the lake itself, the forest beyond it, and much of the land the HOA members lived on all fell within the boundaries of property my family still controlled. The very neighborhood Karen claimed to rule stood on land that had originally been leased out, never purchased outright. And those leases were still tied to the deeds in my possession. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to argue again, but the words seemed to falter on her lips. The officers, now realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped back. They weren't there to resolve a neighborhood spat anymore. They were standing in the middle of a legal standoff that stretched far beyond Karen's clipboard and power trips. The lead officer finally turned to her. His tone was calm but firm. "Ma'am, this doesn't look like trespassing. This looks like a property dispute. And from what I can see, he has the documentation." Karen's composure cracked. The confidence that had carried her all morning vanished, replaced with frantic muttering about bylaws and community votes. She clutched her folder tightly, as if it were a shield that could somehow undo the reality in front of her. But for the first time, she looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. As the officers prepared to leave, advising her to take her concerns to civil court if she wanted to pursue them, I leaned back in my chair. I didn't need to say much. The truth was speaking for itself, echoing louder than any accusation Karen could muster. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. She might have lost the first battle, but she would be back, digging for loopholes, rallying her HOA followers, trying to find new ways to force me out. What she didn't know was that every move she made only tightened the noose around her own authority. The more she pressed, the more the truth would surface. And the truth was that she wasn't fighting a stubborn neighbor. She was fighting the rightful owner of the land beneath her feet. And soon, the entire county would know it too. Karen's defeat in front of the police had been public, humiliating, and deeply personal. But as I expected, she didn't retreat quietly. Within days, she began rallying the HOA, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and calling emergency meetings. She painted me as a dangerous outsider, a manipulator who had tricked the police with fake paperwork. To her followers, she promised swift legal action and assured them the HOA was stronger than any single man. But behind her bravado, cracks were forming. Some neighbors had started to whisper doubts. If I truly owned more than just a cabin, if I controlled the very land beneath their homes, then siding with Karen might mean siding against the one person who actually held legal authority. Still, Karen's charisma and intimidation tactics kept many in line, at least for the moment. I stayed quiet. I didn't chase her down, didn't argue at meetings, didn't raise my voice. Instead, I let her push harder and harder, digging her own grave with every accusation she hurled. Meanwhile, I prepared my next move. It came in the form of a county hearing. Karen had filed an official complaint, demanding that I be evicted from community land. Her petition forced a legal review of all property deeds in the area. She expected the hearing to be her triumphant moment, a stage where she could parade her power in front of the entire community. But the reality was very different. The hearing room filled quickly with neighbors on edge, police officers in attendance, and county officials seated behind a long oak desk. Karen arrived in her usual power suit, head held high, clutching a thick binder of HOA rules. She opened with fiery words, insisting that I had no right to my cabin, my shoreline, or the lake. She spoke with such conviction that some in the crowd nodded along. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, carrying a single leather portfolio. Inside were the original deeds, maps signed by county surveyors, and tax records showing decades of payments made by my family. I laid them out one by one, each document more damning than the last. The officials leaned in, flipping through the papers with growing interest. Murmurs rippled through the room as the truth became undeniable. Not only did I own my cabin in the lake, but the HOA's entire community had been developed on leased land, leases that had quietly expired years ago. Technically, every house in the neighborhood sat on property I still controlled. Their HOA bylaws, their votes, their rules, all of it had been built on a foundation that no longer legally existed. Karen's face twisted with horror as the county officials announced their findings. Her complaint was dismissed immediately. Worse, the HOA's authority was thrown into question. Without legal ownership of the land, their power collapsed like a house of cards. Neighbors turned on her instantly. Some shouted in anger, demanding to know why she had dragged them into this mess. Others looked at me with cautious respect, realizing I wasn't their enemy, but the one person who held the real keys to their future. Karen tried to shout over chaos, waving her binder in desperation, but her voice was drowned out by the very people she once commanded. The final blow came when the county official addressed the room. Calmly, with the weight of law behind him, he confirmed that I was the rightful owner, not just my lakeside cabin, but the land the HOA had long claimed to govern. Karen froze. For the first time, she seemed small, powerless, and exposed. Her empire of rules, fines, and threats had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors. And now, everyone saw through it. When the hearing ended, she stormed out, red-faced and trembling, trailed by the same officers she had once called on me. But this time, there was no smirk, no victory in her step, only silence. I walked out slowly. Neighbors pardoned to let me through. Some offered apologies. Others extended cautious hands, hoping for peace. I didn't gloat, didn't mock, didn't need to. The truth had done the work for me. Back at the cabin, I sat by the lake, the water calm and still. The place felt different now. Lighter, freer, as if the land itself had shaken off the weight of Karen's false authority. For years, she had ruled through fear. But fear collapses the moment it faces truth. The HOA was finished. Karen was finished. And as for me, I hadn't just defended my home. I had reclaimed everything that was rightfully mine, proving once and for all that no amount of arrogance or bullying could erase the power of truth. The lake glimmered under the setting sun, quiet and serene. And for the first time in a long time, it truly felt like home.